The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for your patience and for joining this Federal Policy Update webinar. My name is Julie Klein, and I do federal advocacy work with the National Alliance to End Homelessness. And I'll be joined today by other Alliance staff, Steve Berg, Vice President for Programs and Policy, Kate Seif, Policy Outreach Coordinator, Sharon McDonald, Director for Families and Youth, and Edward Sanfilippo, Economic Development Policy Fellow, as well as Sham Monglik, Policy Analyst at the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. And we'll be discussing some of the key policy priorities for Capitol Hill Day next week and where relevant legislation currently stands. Before we get into the policy priorities, though, I'd like to just go over a few quick webinar logistics. Please note that your lines are muted, and we will be answering questions at the end. You can submit a question at any time throughout the webinar via the control panel box labeled Questions on the right-hand side of your screen. So as soon as you have a question, just go ahead and type it in, and we'll receive it and answer many of those questions at the end. Also, we're going to send out all the materials from this call, and we'll make sure to get a recording of this webinar up on our website in just a day or so. Additionally, for those participating in Capitol Hill Day, you'll be receiving a packet at the conference that will contain all the information covered in this webinar and more. Just to quickly run through the agenda, Steve's going to discuss the current political environment in which we'll all be doing our Hill visits, and then I'll discuss the logistics of Capitol Hill Day, along with some other important aspects of your trips to the Hill. And then we'll go into the specific policy priorities listed on your screen, and as I mentioned earlier, we'll discuss where things stand and what the latest update is on each one. And then finally, we'll go ahead and answer your questions. So now I'm going to turn it over to Steve Berg, Vice President for Programs and Policy here at the Alliance. Steve?
All right, thank you, Julie, and thank you to everyone who has joined this call. We, of course, the National Alliance to End Homelessness, one of our major activities is working on federal policy, and we could not be as successful as we are as a community in this field without the help of people all over the country who are joining with us to let decision makers at the national level know what's going on in their communities and how they can help. We at the Alliance believe that we're at a crucial point this year in this work to end homelessness because of the expanded know-how, because of the hard work that people have been doing across the country. We're really at the cusp of a time of great accomplishment, but at the same time, we're dealing with an overall political environment that makes it very difficult to do things at the federal level. In last year's appropriations spending process that actually didn't end until the beginning of this year, the homeless programs got swept up in these large political issues about what the proper role of government is and what the appropriate levels of spending are, and we received something of a setback. I mean, it was less of a setback than a lot of other HUD programs did. The homeless programs did way better than most did because of the work that people on this call and others did, but it's still not the direction we want to go in. But on the other hand, we believe that conditions are in place this year to undo that setback and to really start moving forward again. There's less focus this year on the big economic issues and more focus back on what the individual programs are, what they do, what's effective and what's not, and that is to our huge advantage. We've succeeded, and I don't mean we, the staff of the National Alliance, I mean this whole community of people who are working on homelessness have been very successful with decision makers in Washington because of the great work that people in the field do. A lot of the people on this call are leaders in your community. You've moved your communities forward, and you also have been very helpful in communicating to decision makers in Washington what that movement is, why the federal participation is important, and what we can do together to really accomplish something for the most vulnerable people in our country. The Hill Day this year has never been more important because of this, because of these opportunities. The timing is perfect. The spending bills for HUD are going to be moving in both the House and the Senate, either the week we're here or shortly thereafter. spending and what's the appropriate level of spending on HUD programs is going to be on the minds of a lot of decision makers throughout Congress. And so we are working hard. We're working hard with you to make sure that we can make a big difference. So that being said, let me turn it back over to Julie, and we'll start getting into some of the details.
Thanks, Steve. Sorry, if I could interrupt really quickly. I just wanted to let people know that they can find the materials if they want to follow along with everything on the website that's on your screen right now. If you go there, you'll find all the talking points and materials and one-pagers that you kind of just look at as we're talking about these issues, and they'll be up there the whole time. So if people want to, and we'll have this website up again at the end, people want to look at that and copy and paste that into their browser now, that'd be great. Thanks, Kate. So now I'm just going to cover a few of the logistics for Capitol Hill Day so we can make sure that both your Hill visits and time of the conference go as smoothly as possible. First off, I would like to extend a very big welcome and thank you to all of our state captains for all of their really hard work up to this point. Capitol Hill Day literally would not be possible without all of you volunteering your time to reach out to the congressional offices and Hill Day participants. We know there's a lot of moving parts, and scheduling congressional meetings is not always the easiest thing to do. So on behalf of Kate and everyone else here, I would really just like to thank you for all your hard work this year. And if you're on this webinar because you're interested in Capitol Hill Day but you haven't yet gotten a chance to connect with your state captain, or you just want more information, please feel free to contact Jenny Lewis, who has been helping us out this summer and is our resident Capitol Hill Day expert. She will connect you with your state captain and answer whatever questions you might have. Her information is on the screen there, and many of you have, of course, already been in regular contact with her. I'd also like to mention that we have an advocacy track of workshops scheduled for our national conference next week, and you can find out more about all the workshops we have geared toward advocacy, including a workshop on conducting successful congressional meetings, which is a great workshop for Capitol Hill Day participants to attend, as well as workshops on advocacy messaging, statewide advocacy, identifying champions, and more. That link listed on your screen will lead you to the advocacy agenda, along with a lot of other great materials, including everything we're going to talk about on this call today to help you prepare for the conference and Capitol Hill Day. If you haven't checked out the Capitol Hill Day webpage already, as Kate pointed out, it's on your screen, and I definitely recommend doing so. You'll be able to find all the workshop information in your program journal when you arrive at the conference as well. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about what to do while at our conference. Kate, Jenny, and I will be stationed at the Advocacy Information Table, which will be located right across from the Grand Registration area, and we will be there throughout pretty much the entire conference, including Sunday night and pre-registration. The Information Table is a great place to get a lot of information, ask us any questions, get any updates, and find out what's going on with your Hill meetings. We will also have participant packets with a lot of great stuff in them, so just be sure to check in with us and pick up one of those and say hi. On site, we'll also have even more materials than what's on our website that will provide some more information on the policy priorities we're going to cover on this webinar, as well as others that we won't quite get to today. In addition, as it mentions on your screen, you can find out when and where your state prep session is from us at that table or by looking at your conference program journal. The state prep sessions are a time for you to meet with your state captain and other participants from your state with whom you might be attending the Hill meetings. And it's really important to attend these state prep sessions because you can find out some more state-specific information. Make sure you know who from your state is going on which meetings and what your policy priorities are as a group. And it's just a really good time to connect with your fellow state participants and, of course, thank your state captain for all their great work. As you may know, Capitol Hill Day this year technically takes place throughout the afternoon of Wednesday, July 24th, following the closing plenary. In many cases, though, your state captains are able to get great meetings at varying times throughout the conference, so it's really important to check in with the advocacy table and make sure you attend the state prep session to get all that information. And finally, I would like to remind all state captains on the call that we'll also have a state captain meeting at 8 a.m. on Tuesday, July 23rd, and all state captains are expected to attend this. It's a really great opportunity to find out all the necessary information, learn the latest updates, and strategize and meet with other state captains. And we'll be covering last-minute logistics, answering questions, and more. So to move on to the policy portion of this webinar now, each year we develop a policy agenda, which is the focus of Hill Day visits. These are really important issues that Congress is considering as you're attending your congressional meetings. We've picked our list of policy priorities based on issues we can have a large impact on during the conference and issues many of you have been working on for the past several months. Since there's been a lot going on this summer, particularly around appropriations, it will be especially important to prioritize which issues to focus on. At your meetings, we strongly encourage you to decide on just one or two issues for each congressional visit. If you ask members of Congress to act on all the things we're going to discuss today on this call, it will really just dilute the significance of all the issues you discuss. It takes members of Congress and their staff a lot of work and analysis to make a decision about a policy request, so you're more likely to be effective if you ask them to do fewer things. This is definitely a case for less is more. One way to help you prioritize is to choose issues based on your members of Congress. So are they on a committee that's currently considering one of these issues, or have they supported similar legislation in the past? We've already spoken to many of you about matching certain policy priorities with specific members of Congress, but if you have any further questions, please just let us know. Okay, I think that just about covers the logistics, but before we delve into the policy priority updates, I just want to remind everyone once again that you can submit questions at any time in the control panel box at the right side of your screen, and we'll answer as many as we have time for at the end of the webinar. Also, we'll have a recording of this webinar available on our website tomorrow, and you'll be able to watch the whole thing or just parts of it, so there's no need to stress about trying to write down every word. And now, without further ado, I'm going to pass this along to my colleague, Edward Sanfilippo, who is going to discuss some of the programs within the Department of Veterans Affairs targeted toward homeless veterans. Ed?
Thanks, Julie. Hi, everybody. My name is Ed Sanfilippo, and I want to thank you for joining the webinar today. And as Julie said, I'm going to cover the appropriations for the VA programs. The President's request for fiscal year 2014 totaled $1.4 billion for homeless veteran programs within VA. As you can see on the slide, this includes funding for the following: SSVF, which is a rapid rehousing and prevention program for veterans and their families; the Grant and Per Diem program, which includes transitional housing and services and is evolving to meet the needs of a new generation of homeless veterans; and HUD-VASH, which includes permanent supportive housing and case management for chronically homeless and high-need veterans. This funding level adds 10,000 new Housing Choice vouchers nationwide. We believe that this funding is at a scale where we'll continue to see reductions in veterans' homelessness in the coming years. At this point, the full House approved the VA's proposal, and so has the Senate Appropriations Committee, so this budget is on track to be fully funded. In the interest of time, I'm going to quickly run through these congressional talking points, but as Julie and Kate have both mentioned, you can always find the complete resources on our website. So the need for the veterans, the last count, there were approximately 62,600 homeless veterans, and with the rapid drawdown of the current conflict, we may see more. We're finding that vets are younger, more of them are females, and more have children and other dependents. So we need to have a system in place to prevent another generation of veterans from becoming homeless. In continuing progress, we have made significant progress in this area. Veteran homelessness has been reduced by 17% since 2009, so we need to continue funding programs at a scale that will address current and future veteran homelessness. With the current budget we're advocating for, ending veteran homelessness is becoming a reality. And cost effectiveness. HUD-VASH, while a higher cost intervention, is still a dramatic cost savings when compared to the cost of short-term housing, medical, and legal costs. It is the right thing to do for a veteran who has many barriers and needs and has been on the streets for a while. These resources need to be targeted to chronically homeless veterans and other high-need vets to remain cost-effective. SSVF is a lower cost intervention that is proven to work in both housing the homeless and preventing future homelessness. And finally, community partnerships. The VA has recognized that the mission of ending homelessness among veterans is a complex issue and has identified the need to work on the community level to get the job done. Funding these programs will help ensure ongoing collaborations between VA and local communities. Again, you can contact us or go to the website to get these talking points and more information. And next on our agenda, Kate is going to talk about McKinney appropriations. Thanks.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, like Ed said, I'm going to talk about funding for HUD's McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Grants, both the Emergency Solutions Grants, or ESG as they're more commonly called, and the Continuum of Care Program, or COC funding, as we often refer to it as. So this year we're asking for $2.381 billion for FY 2014, which is what the President asked for in his budget proposal back in April. And in its explanation of this funding request, HUD specifically cited its commitment to implementing both the HEARTH Act and the Federal Strategic Plan to Prevent and End Homelessness. So as an update, the House has proposed a funding level of $2.088 billion. And this is also a pretty decent increase over the sequestered FY 2013 level you can see up on your screen. But it's important to note that this funding level, the 2.088, would provide no new funding for the COC projects and would only cover post-sequestration fiscal year 2013 level of renewals, which would ultimately mean that the programs that get cut in the next NOFA, so the NOFA that comes out in the fall is likely to have about 6 to 8% cuts to the continuum of care, wouldn't be, those cuts then wouldn't be refunded again under the House's proposal, so they would stay cut. And unlike the Senate and the administration that proposed pretty significant increases to the ESG account, the House bill recommends that at least $200 million go toward the Emergency Solutions Grant. Now, the at least $200 million means that HUD could increase this level, but then it would, of course, cut into COC dollars a little more. Now, the $2.38 billion would do some pretty exciting things. It would provide a significant increase in the ESG funding for more rapid rehousing and prevention efforts, including $60 million dedicated to specific urban areas for rapid rehousing. It would also provide enough funding for all COC renewals and even for some new projects, which the administration would like geared toward permanent supportive housing. It's a significant increase over the final sequestered FY 2013 level, which, as you can see on your screen, was $1.929 billion. But it would do a lot of good stuff, and it would definitely get us over sequestration and sort of back on track doing the great things that we know we can do with the right investments. The Senate, of course, also proposed an increase, though it wasn't quite as large, to $2.26 billion. Wasn't quite as large as the administration's proposed increase. By our estimates, that $2.26 would be enough to cover the increase in the cost of COC renewals, and it would get us back to the pre-sequester level of the FY 2012 funding, and it would provide. Within that 2.26, it would also provide $336 million for ESG, which would, of course, be a very significant increase over the current levels. But due to the large ESG allocation, which is fantastic, but because of that, there wouldn't actually be enough for new projects, and that's just by our rough estimates. Particularly given the tight budget constraints we're under, the increases proposed by the administration and the Senate and even the House are really an exciting commitment from both HUD and Congress to really make sure that we're making progress toward the goals under the Federal Strategic Plan. And it's important to note, as Steve mentioned earlier, that the Senate is actually planning on bringing their HUD funding bill to the Senate floor very soon. It could actually even happen next week during the conference. So this is really important, as we're going to need as many senators as possible to sort of stand up during floor debate on this bill and speak in support of the HUD funding levels included in the legislation. So this is a great opportunity this week, next week. Many of you probably received my McKinney email alert about this yesterday. It's a great opportunity to mention specifically to your senators that they should support this bill. Encourage them or their staff to sort of stand up during debate on the floor in favor of the funding levels provided in the Senate's legislation. And if the legislation, especially the proposed HUD funding levels, do pass in a bipartisan fashion, those funding levels, that strong 2.26, will have a much better chance of sort of staying robust during the final negotiations with the House. Of course, at the end of the process, the House and Senate need to work out their differences, and if that 2.26 or an even higher number has really strong support from the Senate, it has a much better chance of coming out intact in a conference. So we'll be talking more about this during the state captain meeting Julie referred to earlier, and we'll also be doing a little more advocacy work on it this week, so you'll be seeing more about it. But we just wanted to let everyone know that now, even those of you who aren't able to make it to the conference, we're right now in the midst of some really important advocacy opportunities. So if we can get our senators to fully support the significantly stronger funding levels for HUD programs over the House, we'll be really well suited as the process goes on. So that's where things currently stand. Now to get, and I kind of talked about sort of what each level would do. So to get back to that 2.381 billion we're asking for the FY 2014. It is possible that you'll get some pushback from some congressional offices that may see this as a very large increase, because of course it would be. So your Hill Day packets, and again on that website that we showed earlier, have some suggested talking points to give you a sense of the kinds of points you should be making to make the case for these programs. Really the key to your conversations with your members and their staff is to focus on how effective these McKinney programs are. And Steve talked about this earlier. These programs are really working. Because both chambers are required to limit their spending, they have a cap on how much they can spend, so they're really trying to prioritize how they ultimately spend their money. So we have all of this really great outcome data from McKinney programs and HMIS, and this is the time to really let that shine. And you can talk about the effectiveness and cost-effectiveness of permanent supportive housing, the light touch interventions that make up rapid rehousing, all those different things. The key is to really focus on how important these programs are to your community and to share as much data and outcome information as you can to really make the case. When you're talking about how effective these programs are and the decreases we saw in homelessness between 2005 and 2009, and even now our ability to hold the line on the overall number of homelessness despite a really bad economy and some really serious indicators in income and housing costs that we all thought would lead to significant increases in homelessness. But when you're talking about all this stuff, you should also still be talking about increased needs. So we're able to hold the line, we're able to see reductions, but now, we're definitely going to see increased need. The economy is, of course, improving. You could arguably say slowly but surely, but things haven't necessarily gotten a whole lot better for the lowest income people. And furthermore, the cost of housing is still out of reach to many people, leaving them at higher risk of homelessness. We're seeing, I'll get to this later, but with cuts to Section 8 and other low-income housing programs and safety net programs, we're likely to see a lot more people entering the homeless assistance system and relying on these programs for assistance. So we need to make sure that those people get the help they need, and I think that's an important message. Finally, I'll note that the Alliance has a justification paper for our $2.381 billion ask for the FY 2014, and in it we kind of just break down what that $2.381 will go toward in a little more detail. But we note in that paper that the level proposed by the President over the last year's level would mean housing instead of homelessness for over 200,000 people. That's really quite significant and would make a huge difference in our communities. So that's definitely worth noting in your interactions with your congressional offices or in your advocacy work moving forward this summer. So with that, I'm going to stop talking about McKinney. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to enter them at any time in the chat questions box, and we'll get to them when we get a chance at the end. And I'm going to turn things over to Sharon to talk about youth homelessness.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. So the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act programs consist of 3 programs: Basic Centers, which provide shelters to youth under the age of 18, Transitional Living Programs for youth up into the age of 21, and Street Outreach Programs that connect with youth who are in vulnerable situations and try and connect them to the right kinds of resources. The President's budget requested $115 million for Runaway and Homeless Youth Act programs, the 3 programs, which is about what it's received in the past, except for last year, which was hit by sequestration. This year, for the first time, the President's budget included a request for $3 million for an incidence and prevalence study. So this is a study to really understand and capture the extent of homelessness among young people to get a national count. And we think that getting a national count and really understanding the dynamics of youth homelessness is critical to right-sizing the interventions and allowing communities and the federal governments to put the right kinds of solutions into place. So the President's request in total was $118 million for Runaway and Homeless Youth Act programs, if you include that $3 million for the study. The Senate appropriations has allocated $116 million for the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act. So a little bit extra, but no funding for the study. The Alliance is working closely with our partners at the National Network for Youth, and we are continuing to be optimistic and have an ask of $128 million for Runaway and Homeless Youth programs. So that's a $10 million increase for the basic programs and $3 million for the prevalence and incidence study. Next slide, please. What we really think is critical for you to do when you meet with members of Congress is really the most important thing, is to let them know about how homeless youth are impacted by the lack of resources in your community. It's really going to be, I think, throughout these programs, the local stories, the citizens, your partners who are being impacted by cuts or turning away youth every single day. So to the extent that you're able to bring in data from your own community, from your own programs, from your partnering organizations, that would be the most effective. We are asking you to request funding at $128 million and include the $3 million for an incidence and prevalence study. So that's our ask. The theme, again, for the talking points, which is the next slide, is again that the demand for services is greatly exceeding the supply. The National Network for Youth counted 37,000 turnaways from basic centers and TLP programs between 2009 and 2012. So those are youth who are being turned away without any shelter or safe place to sleep. Again, local data would be much more effective here than those national data. The Runaway and Homeless Youth Act programs are effective. Youth exit these programs to safe locations, very often returning home with family. Youth without services are highly vulnerable. Youth are sleeping in unsafe locations. They are sleeping in the homes of strangers. They're particularly vulnerable. And we are seeing through research that the longer time that youth remain outdoors or are not connected to services, the more vulnerable they are to poor outcomes. Early intervention is best, and we can't intervene if there's no place to bring youth in. So it's critical that we invest more in solving youth homelessness. And we really want the incidence and prevalence study to make sure that Congress and localities are really right-sizing the interventions and have a thorough understanding of who's experiencing homelessness locally. And again, I want to point you to the data that we have, all the material that Kate's put together. So thank you, and I will return it to Kate.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm going to touch quickly on the latest update in advocacy ask for Section 8 housing choice voucher programs now. We are asking Congress to renew all existing Section 8 vouchers and replace those lost by fiscal year 2013 sequestration, and to provide $75 million for about 10,000 new HUD-VASH vouchers on top of that. So now you can see the dollar values associated with the various chambers on your screen, but just as with HUD's McKinney-Vento programs, the cost of renewing Section 8 vouchers increases each year. So an increase in the dollar level is not, the dollar level that eventually gets passed is not necessarily enough to mean that all existing vouchers will be funded again. And things are even further complicated by the fact that Section 8 vouchers have been underfunded for a few years, as we all know, and were particularly hard hit by sequestration. So I know that many people, many communities have already begun to see the effects of Section 8 sequestration cuts this summer, with waiting lists not moving, vouchers being rescinded, and a lot of other issues. However, the good news with all of this is that everyone agrees that there should be money for new HUD-VASH vouchers. So at least as of now, all three, the House, Senate, and administration have proposed that $75 million for 10,000 new vouchers. Though it's still really important to continue to mention how important HUD-VASH is because you never know, what could happen. Particularly with the big variations in those three numbers and the ultimate overall allocation for Section 8. Then, whatever comes up in the ultimate compromise, it's important that we make sure and still continue to fight for those $75 million for those 10,000 vouchers. So when you're talking about Section 8, generally, it's important to just educate congressional offices on why affordable housing is so important to your community. You want to talk about the level of need, how many people are on your community's waiting list for vouchers, how many are facing severe housing cost burden and are at risk of losing their housing, and things of that nature. And when you're talking about HUD-VASH more specifically, you want to make it clear that, I think we touched on this earlier, Ed talked about it, housing coupled with services is a model proven to help end chronic homelessness for veterans and non-veterans alike, and it's often, of course, cost-effective in the process. You can also talk about the fact that, in general, by preventing homelessness, Section 8 vouchers can often really save communities money on many expensive systems of care. So talk about local populations whose homelessness can and often is prevented by receiving affordable housing assistance. You should also talk about the fact that giving someone a Section 8 voucher not only either ends their homelessness or prevents it, but also improves other outcomes like employment, income, alcohol use, and things of that nature. So by focusing on these sort of overarching themes for Section 8, you can make a pretty convincing case that the value of these programs, in ending homelessness, and the value of these programs to your community in general. So now I'm going to pass it over to Sham, who's going to be talking about United for Homes campaign. Sham?
Hi, everyone. First, I'd really like to thank the Alliance for including the United for Homes campaign to fund the National Housing Trust Fund in your lobby agenda. So the National Housing Trust Fund, and you can go to the next slide, please. The National Housing Trust Fund was authorized in 2008 to expand the supply of the housing that's available and affordable to extremely low-income households. So households with incomes at or below 30% of area median income. In 2011, this shortage was 7.1 million units. So the National Housing Trust Fund campaign proposes to modify the mortgage interest deduction, which is the second largest tax expenditure on the individual side of the tax code. We propose two changes. The first, lowering the cap on the size of a mortgage for which a household can get a break for the interest they pay from $1 million to $500,000. The second proposed change is converting the deduction to a 15% non-refundable credit. These two changes together would raise $197 billion over 10 years if the changes were phased in over 5 years. And we propose that all this money go to fund the National Housing Trust Fund to expand the supply of affordable housing to help end homelessness. In addition to raising money to fund the National Housing Trust Fund, these changes would also increase the number of homeowners who receive a tax break for the interest that they pay on their mortgage by 16 million households, 99% of whom have incomes below $100,000. Next slide, please. And so we have two asks for Lobby Day, one for the House and one for the Senate. For the House side, the ask is that representatives co-sponsor H.R. 1213, the Common Sense Housing Investment Act. This is legislation that's been introduced by Representative Keith Ellison from Minnesota, and the bill includes the proposed changes to the mortgage interest deduction that I just outlined. The bill would apply the majority of the money to the National Housing Trust Fund. The second legislative ask is for the Senate. So a few weeks ago, Senate Finance Committee Chair Max Baucus and Ranking Member Orrin Hatch sent a letter to every senator asking that they submit their tax priorities if the tax code were a blank slate, pretty much meaning that there was nothing included in the tax code at all. We think it's really important that the United for Homes proposal be included in senators' letters to the committee. These letters are due a couple of days after the lobby day on Friday, July 26th, and it would be great if offices could include this proposal in there, as it's the first concrete chance that every Senate office has had to weigh in on the comprehensive tax reform process on the Senate side. Thank you, and now Steve will talk about sequestration.
All right, thanks, Sham. So I'm going to go over a little bit what the effect of sequestration has been so far and sort of how it continues to play a role in the discussion going forward, and then we'll wrap it up and we'll get to the question and answer period as soon as I'm done. Sequestration, as people know, was the across-the-board cuts to programs that was part of the fiscal 2013 appropriations bill. That's the technical formal meaning. Now, the word sequestration in the federal budget talk has come to have sort of two different meanings. It's got the technical meaning, which is the across-the-board cuts to every program, and then it's got sort of a looser meaning. And when people use it, what they're talking about is sort of the second round of cuts to spending that the Budget Control Act put in place back in 2009. So if people remember that, there was one round of cuts that took effect immediately, that's starting in 2010, that cut domestic and defense spending a certain amount. But then they said, well, there's going to be the super committee. The super committee is going to meet and try and come up with other budget savings, and if the super committee can't come up with other budget savings, then there will be a second round of cuts. And that second round of cuts is what we're dealing with now. It was the cuts took place partway through the fiscal 2013 fiscal year, and again, they were put into place as across-the-board cuts to every program. That means effective programs and ineffective programs got cut by the same amount. Now, as a group that feels very strongly that the programs we advocate for are very effective, that is the last thing we want to see. But nonetheless, we are seeing it. As people know, HUD sort of put most of the cut ESG a little more to avoid shorting the continuum of care programs any more than they had to. The ESG cuts are already in effect. As people know, the fiscal 2013 ESG grants are used by states and localities for the state and local fiscal years that started just this last July 1st, just a couple of weeks ago. So people are already feeling the impact of ESG cuts. When the NOFA comes out for the continuum of care this year, it will have around our current estimate is 7 to 8% less than what's needed to fund all renewals at their existing level. Now, it may be that HUD will find more recapture funding. Sorry if I'm getting a little technical for people who don't do the continuum of care. It may be that the cuts will be a little less than that, but that's our current estimate. So what that means for fiscal 2014, in fiscal 2014, there's no across-the-board cuts. The overall spending level for domestic programs, if nothing changes, is supposed to be at about the same level as it was for 2013. However, it's not program by program. There's just an overall domestic spending level, and it's up to the Appropriations Committee to decide how to allocate it, which programs to cut more, which programs to cut less, which programs to give an increase to. So as a program that's an effective program, a program that really does good things on the ground, the homeless programs have a little advantage in that setting. But we're still up against a very difficult problem in terms of making the HUD homeless programs, making Section 8 vouchers, making the other things we talk about fit under these very tight overall spending limits. There are proposals to loosen the spending limits, to undo sequestration overall. The administration's proposal, the proposal of the Senate budget resolution, so several different sort of nonprofit groups, think tanks that work on budget issues have proposed doing away with sequestration, allowing discretionary spending to go up a little bit, and instead getting budget savings by tax increases combined with cuts in entitlement spending, which is where the real long-term budget challenges are. That's way beyond the scope of this call. But let's just say that the impact of sequestration continues to be with us, although, again, it's not quite so inflexible. So we've got a chance for even if Congress doesn't do anything to undo sequestration, we've got a chance to do some things for the programs that are the most effective. There's a couple of overall messages on this that are talking points that we offer. One is on the big issue, the big budget issues. I think if a lot of people tend to agree that the cuts in domestic spending, the cuts to HUD overall, are just too much. The impact on Section 8, the impact on CDBG, for example, is just too much. If you look at the House Appropriations Bill, you know, the homeless programs did a lot better than most HUD programs. If you look at the whole range of HUD programs in the House Appropriations Bill, you'll see just additional cuts to what's already in place that are really untenable for people trying to do things at the local level. So that's the big talking point. But the other talking point is that there are going to be limits on non-defense spending, on discretionary spending. Whatever those limits are, it's very important that Congress prioritize programs like homeless assistance that serve the most vulnerable people, that have proven effective, and that have a history of bipartisan support. So those are the messages that I think it's most important that people get across. So with that being said, there's a lot more we could say about sequestration. Again, people who are interested in learning more about it, please be in touch with us. There's a lot of, the Alliance is working with a number of other advocacy groups in DC on these big budget issues. There's very important work to do there, and it's good timing that people are in town for the kind of discussion that Congress is having right now. So with that, let me turn it back to Julie, and she can wrap up and take us into the question and answer period. Julie?
Great. Thanks, Steve. All right. At this point, as Steve said, I think we can turn to respond to some questions that were submitted throughout the webinar. The floor is still open to new questions, so please feel free to submit them as we continue. And since we won't be able to get to all of the questions, we will be contacting some of you individually by email after the webinar. So the first question for Steve is, with the House's VA proposal, are we still on track to end homelessness among veterans by 2015?
Yeah, I think because VA was not affected by sequestration either in 2013, they do have budget caps, but it's a little different sort of arrangement than what HUD has. So the funding for VA for VA homeless programs is the same as what the administration asked for, which by our best estimate is very exciting, in that it really funds these programs at a level that communities are going to have the resources they need to really make a huge impact on the number of homeless veterans over the next year or two, and really to bring them and really in line with the administration's goal of ending veterans homelessness by the end of 2015. So that's one piece of good news in this budget.
And this is Kate. So I just wanted to add a few points of clarification about the VA budget. So Steve mentioned this, but just to clarify, the the budget proposal for VA, that $1.4 billion put out by the administration, which is a slight increase over last year's, has also already been adopted by the full House and the Senate Appropriations Committee. So those numbers look like they are moving forward. Now, the important thing is that VA programs have largely just gone untouched by these kind of bigger budget issues. But we are maybe thinking that if things, kind of go crazy, if there are big negotiations or big budget issues, that VA programs won't be as protected as they have been. So we really need to make sure that, that $1.4 billion that's kind of gone through, with lots of support so far stays supported. We need to make sure that, people understand that this will make a huge step in ending veteran homelessness. And it's kind of, homeless veterans, it seems like we can always get a lot of support for that, and veterans in general. But there's also this element of nothing is sacred. And we need to do what we can to make sure that, all members of Congress understand the importance of these programs and the need to keep that 1.4. And just to also clarify, so there is the HUD-VASH within VA is for case management. So the case management portion, aka the services in permanent supportive housing for HUD-VASH, comes from VA, whereas the housing vouchers come from HUD. So it's a joint HUD-VA program, so that the line items in both the HUD budget and VA correspond to case management and the housing voucher. So that's it. Next question. Thanks, Steve and Kate. So the next question we have is for Sean, and the question is, how does changing the mortgage deduction to a credit affect spending?
Hi, thanks for the question. So we don't have it split out if the savings come from converting the deduction to a credit or from lowering the cap. We've just done our modeling together. But first off, those two changes would raise $197 billion over 10 years, phased in over 5 years. So that would reduce spending. If the savings were applied to the National Housing Trust Fund, that would fund the National Housing Trust Fund in a deficit-neutral way.
Great. Thanks so much. Okay, thank you to everyone who submitted questions. I think we're going to wrap up at this point, but if you have any further questions regarding the content of the webinar or the logistics of Hill Day, please don't hesitate to email them to Kate, Jenny, or myself, or stop by the advocacy information table at the conference. And again, we have a lot of this information posted on our Capitol Hill Day website as well. Thanks again, everyone, for joining our webinar today. We look forward to seeing many of you next week at the conference. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.